February 18, 1944, over northern France, 11:02 hours. The gray winter sky hung low and heavy as 18 RAF Mosquito FB Mk.VIs skimmed across the French countryside at treetop height, engines howling in synchronized fury. The aircraft, the wooden wonders, flew so low their prop wash flattened hedgerows and sent flocks of crows exploding into the air. Inside the cockpit of the lead aircraft, Group Captain Percy Charles Pickard kept his eyes locked on the horizon, jaw tight beneath his oxygen mask. Ahead lay the walled fortress prison of Amiens Prison, one of the most heavily guarded detention sites in German-occupied France. Inside its stone walls were 717 inmates, including over 100 French resistance members scheduled for execution within days. Operation Jericho was their only hope. The mission had been debated for weeks, whispered through the halls of British intelligence. Could the RAF break open a prison without killing the prisoners inside? Could they hit a specific wall, a single block of medieval masonry at 250 miles per hour in winter fog under German guns? The answer, finally, had been yes, they had to. Pickard glanced sideways at his navigator, Flight Lieutenant Bill Broadley, who held a stopwatch in a white-knuckled grip. Timing was everything. If they arrived too early, the guards would have time to react. Too late, and the prisoners would already be penned in the yard or at work details. The mosquitoes thundered across open fields, frost-coating barns, and narrow dirt roads as Broadley read out landmarks barely visible through the haze. Rail line dead ahead, church spire, bend in the river, 30 seconds to turning point. The aircraft behind them flew with near-perfect precision, each pilot trusting the man in front of him, each burdened with a bomb load designed not for carpet destruction, but for surgical demolition. 500-pound armor-piercing bombs fitted with delayed fuses. Their task? Breach the outer wall and the inner cell blocks, opening escape routes before German reinforcements could arrive. But the winter fog was thicker than forecast. The landscape blurred into streaks of gray and white. A few seconds off course could take them over a German flak battery or directly into a cluster of farmhouses where civilians still lived. "Altitude steady at 50 feet, Broadley murmured. "Speed 240, we're good." Pickard checked the fuel gauge, checked the compass, and then looked out at the formation. The mosquitoes flew in tight lines, their engines thrumming like a single heartbeat. Behind them, the second wave maintained distance. Behind that, the third wave carried the photographic unit, one aircraft tasked with recording the prison walls and confirming the breach. The entire operation had to unfold with clockwork precision. Wave 1 hits the outer wall, Wave 2 hits the guard barracks, Wave 3 confirms. Then, with any luck, French resistance members inside the prison would organize a breakout using smuggled wire cutters and improvised tools planted weeks earlier by the SOE. Pickard checked the stopwatch clipped to the dashboard, 3 minutes behind schedule. Too much fog, too many micro-adjustments to avoid telephone lines and church towers. Broadley swore under his breath. "If we don't hit on the second mark—" "We will," Pickard said firmly. "We don't have the luxury of missing." A flash of sunlight broke through the clouds, illuminating the snow-dusted fields just long enough for Broadley to spot the curving river ahead. "Right turn, now!" Pickard banked hard, wings almost clipping a row of poplars as the formation pivoted. The prison lay less than a minute away now, just beyond that rise, past the frozen farmland and the abandoned railway depot where German troops usually patrolled. "Flak towers at the perimeter," Broadley warned. "Expect resistance." As if summoned, tracers erupted from a hidden emplacement ahead, streaks of red-orange slicing through the air. Pickard yanked the Mosquito left, engines screaming, while the aircraft behind him split into evasive arcs. A burst of flak detonated too close, shrapnel pinging off the wooden fuselage like hailstones. One Mosquito wobbled, dipped, recovered. Another wasn't so lucky. Smoke trailed from its starboard engine as it dropped away toward a distant field. "Are almost there," Broadley shouted. "Prison in sight. North wall. Prepare for release." Through the cockpit glass, the Amiens prison emerged from the mist like a stone citadel. High walls, watchtowers, and the central courtyard where prisoners would soon gather for roll call. Pickard could see guards on the parapet now, tiny silhouettes pointing upward, scrambling into firing positions. The Mosquito hurtled toward the northern wall, the ground rising to meet them as they descended even lower, 30 feet, 25 feet, barely above the winter grass. Broadley steadied his hands on the bomb toggles. "Hold it! Hold it!" Pickard aligned the crosshairs with the exact section of wall intelligence had marked. A thick slab of masonry, old, brittle, vulnerable, but only if hit exactly right. Now, Broadley slammed the release. The Mosquito jerked upward as the two bombs dropped, hundreds of pounds of steel hurtling toward the target at terminal speed. Pickard pulled hard, engines roaring as they soared over the prison courtyard, the walls flashing beneath them. A heartbeat later, boom! A blast ripped through the fog, shaking the aircraft. Broadley twisted in his seat to look. The targeted section of wall had erupted into a plume of smoke and shattered stone. A breach, a real one. The second Mosquito in the wave released its load, another thunderous impact, widening the breach until a section of the outer wall simply collapsed inward, stones tumbling like dominoes. Guards scattered, prisoners poured from their cells, shouts rising from the courtyard. But Salvo 1 was only the beginning. Pickard steadied his aircraft and banked for the second approach path, and then Broadley shouted, "Incoming fighters, 2 o'clock!" Dark shapes rose from the east. BF-109 scrambled from a nearby airfield, streaking toward the prison like angry hornets. The RAF still had bombs to drop, resistance fighters still needed the courtyard opened, and the Luftwaffe was now diving straight at them. The mission wasn't over. The most dangerous part was still ahead. February 18th, 1944. Amiens Prison, 11:08 hours. The first breach in the northern wall had blown open in a cloud of shattered masonry, and the dust still hung over the courtyard as the prisoners, stunned, disoriented, and half believing the explosion to be an earthquake, stared at the gaping hole. Then the second Mosquito's bombs widened the gap, sending another tremor through the prison and knocking guards from the parapets. Within seconds, chaos swept the courtyard. Resistance fighters who had waited months for this moment yelled for the others to move, to run, to climb over the rubble before the Germans regrouped. Some inmates hesitated, terrified. Others sprinted blindly for the breach. Meanwhile, overhead, the Mosquitoes banked hard for their second attack run as the BF-109s dove in from the east, engines screaming. Pickard's canopy shook as tracers streaked past, the German fighters ripping into the formation with ruthless precision. "They're on us," Broadley shouted. "We stay on target," Pickard replied, jaw set. Wave 2 had one job: hit the guard barracks and the main administrative building to disrupt radio communication and prevent the Germans from locking down the surviving prisoners. The second wave swept in at rooftop level, bombs already armed. As they roared past the northeast tower, flak gunners fired wildly, their shots tearing through the low fog. One Mosquito flew so low its propellers clipped the top branches of winter bare trees, scattering splinters. The lead plane of Wave 2 released its payload, and the bombs punched into the guard barracks, an instant later erupting into a rolling fireball that blew doors off hinges and sent rifles and equipment flying. The guards who had been scrambling to form up were thrown to the ground, several silenced instantly. A second Mosquito hit the administrative building. Documents, maps, chairs, and glass erupted outward as the structure caved inward, flames licking at the shattered windows. The prison compound, once a fortress of order and discipline, was devolving into a battlefield. Prisoners now surged toward the demolished wall, climbing over debris or leaping down the remains of staircases shattered by the shock waves. But not all of them knew what was happening. Not yet. Many inmates were still locked inside their cells, pounding on the iron doors, trapped in the smoke-filled corridors. On the ground, a small group of resistance prisoners, those who had been warned in coded messages smuggled into bread loaves, rushed through the chaos toward the internal block. They had stolen keys. They knew which doors held key French agents. They had seconds, maybe minutes, before German reinforcements arrived from Amiens proper. Meanwhile, in the sky, the dogfight intensified. 2 Bf-109s streaked down on the 3rd Mosquito in the first wave, cannon shells bursting behind the tail. The British pilot jinked left, engines straining. "They're trying to force us off target," Broadley shouted. "Hold steady," Pickard barked back. The Mosquito bucked as another burst of flak erupted beneath them. The wooden fuselage, fast, agile but fragile, groaned under the strain. Despite the hits, Pickard pushed the aircraft down for the 3rd attack run, a near-suicidal pass targeting the southern gate. If they could destroy the guard post at the main entrance, dozens more prisoners would be able to flee before the Germans sealed the area. "Approach line dead ahead," Broadley said. "This is the one." Pickard angled the aircraft downward again, skimming the rooftops so low they almost scraped tiles off the nearby houses. They plunged through the fog, the prison looming up beneath them. "Ready! Ready! Release!" Broadley pulled the lever. 2 bombs dropped clean and slammed into the guardhouse, exploding in a fountain of flames and rubble. The main gate disintegrated. Prisoners inside shouted and surged through the widening gaps in the fence. Guards scattered like ants. German officers screamed confused orders. Everything was collapsing. The walls, the barracks, the chain of command. Operation Jericho was working, but the Luftwaffe wasn't finished. A Bf-109 swept in from behind and fired a blistering cannon burst, the shells ripping through the tail section of Pickard's Mosquito. The aircraft lurched violently. Warning lights blinked red. "We've lost elevator control," Broadley yelled. Pickard fought the stick, the Mosquito wobbling badly, one wing dipping as smoke streamed behind them. "Can we make altitude?" "Not like this." Pickard scanned the horizon. Fields, trees, frozen roads. No flat ground long enough for a landing. And circling back over the prison again would be suicide. Meanwhile, below, the resistance prisoners managed to force open 2 cell blocks, pulling terrified men into the smoking corridors and guiding them toward the breached walls. Some prisoners were shot by panicking guards, others vanished in the confusion. But dozens, soon hundreds, were pouring into the fields, running through the fog as the distant rumble of German trucks echoed from Amiens. Wave 3, the photographic Mosquito, dive-bombed through the chaos, taking reconnaissance images of the breach to confirm mission success. Then one of the Bf-109s surged upward, firing at the camera aircraft. The Mosquito twisted, dodged, and soared back toward cloud cover. Pickard's aircraft, crippled and shaking, tried to follow, but the control surfaces were failing. "Percy, she's not holding together," Broadley shouted, holding on to the dashboard as the Mosquito dropped lower. Pickard gritted his teeth. "Not yet. We get clear, then bail." But the Bf-109 was climbing behind them, lining up for the kill. Smoke thickened inside the cockpit. The prison was now behind them, but the danger was not. Operation Jericho had succeeded, but Pickard and Broadley were still deep in France, and the enemy wasn't letting them go. February 18th, 1944, southeast of Amiens. 11:15 hours. Smoke choked the cockpit as Pickard wrestled the crippled Mosquito through the low winter haze, the aircraft trembling violently with each gust of wind. The tail section was shredded, elevator control nearly gone, and flames licked along the starboard engine cowling. Broadley coughed hard, eyes watering, hands braced against the console as he fought to keep his instruments readable. Behind them, a Bf-109 closed in, a dark silhouette cutting through the mist with predatory precision. "He's lining up again," Broadley shouted. Pickard banked left, harder than the damaged aircraft could handle. The Mosquito dipped, nearly clipping a row of leafless trees before Pickard stabilized her. The 109 opened fire, cannon shells streaking past, the vibration shaking the frame as shrapnel rattled against the wooden fuselage. "We can't outrun him," Broadley said through gritted teeth. "Then we don't," Pickard answered. "We make him overshoot." He dropped the Mosquito's nose sharply. The sudden dive caught the German pilot off guard. The 109 streaked past overhead, unable to adjust. Pickard leveled out just above the frozen fields, skimming so low the prop tips kicked up mud. Broadly looked out through the broken canopy and saw smoke rising from Amiens Prison far behind them. The wall was breached, the gatehouse destroyed. Dozens, maybe hundreds of prisoners now fled across open farmland. Even from miles away, he imagined them running through fields, ducking into ditches, vanishing into the countryside before German reinforcements could re-establish control. The operation had worked, but the enemy wasn't giving them the luxury of escape. The Bf-109 looped around for another strike. "Percy, bail out!" Broadly shouted. "We're not going to make England in this condition. We can't bail out now. We're too low." Ahead, a row of barns and a thin country road blurred into view. Civilians ran from their houses, pointing upward as the burning Mosquito thundered past. Broadly heard the 109's engine behind them again. It was closing fast, gaining the perfect firing angle. Picard's voice steadied. "Get ready. If we have to ditch, we do it in the fields past that farmhouse." "Copy," Broadly said, though both men knew the Mosquito was barely flying. The German fighter dove, its cannons flashed. The next burst tore through the fuselage, smashing into the rear spar. The aircraft shuddered violently, then the tail began to shear. Warning alarms screamed, smoke filled the cockpit. Picard's hands tightened on the stick. The Mosquito rolled, dipped, and began to fall into a slow, fatal spiral. "Percy!" Broadly tried to reach the escape hatch, but the centrifugal force pinned him to his seat. The aircraft spun lower, the ground rushing up in a chaotic whirl of brown fields and white frost. "Hold on! Hold on!" Picard managed. Then the Mosquito hit the ground in a violent explosion of splintered wood and flame. A shockwave rolled through the nearby fields, scattering brittle stalks of winter wheat. The Bf-109 circled once overhead, confirming the crash, then banked east and vanished into the clouds. For a moment, the countryside fell silent, a farmer and his wife rushing toward the burning wreck, only to stop short at the sight of German motorcycles already roaring up the road. Wehrmacht patrols dismounted, rifles raised, boots crunching frost as they surrounded the crash site. The 2 RAF airmen had been killed on impact. One officer saluted the wreckage, a gesture of respect rarely seen in wartime, before ordering his men to secure the scene. Back at Amiens Prison, the consequences of the raid rippled outward. The breach created by the Mosquitoes had allowed at least 250 prisoners to escape into the countryside. Some melted into resistance safe houses. Some would later join partisan groups fighting in the forests. Some would be recaptured in the following days. But dozens of key resistance members, including several scheduled for execution, vanished into the network of farms and villages the Germans never fully penetrated. Within weeks, French underground cells were operational again, strengthened by the very men Operation Jericho had freed. Picard and Broadly never saw the outcome, but the men they rescued kept their names alive in whispered tributes passed from barn loft to cellar hideout, across coded messages and radio bursts sent from the French countryside back to London. The walls lay shattered for months afterward, a silent monument to the day wooden aircraft flew lower than seemed possible, defying German guns to break open a fortress. Operation Jericho would be debated, questioned, mythologized. But for those who lived because of it, the truth remained simple. 2 RAF flyers had given everything to break the locks on an occupied nation's hope.